Good evening again. I'd like to call the committee of the whole for the Village of Cary for Tuesday, December 6th, 2022 to order with roll call, please.
Cavelli?
Here.
Dudek?
Here.
Collier?
Here.
Weinhammer?
Here.
Walrath?
Here.
Please let the record, did you get everyone? I'm sorry.
McAlpine?
Sorry.
Here. It's okay, you forgot.
Let the record reflect that we have previously voted to allow trustee Walrath to attend remotely. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now moving to the public comments. The public is invited to make an issue-oriented comment on any matter of public concern not otherwise on the agenda. Is there anybody who would like to address the committee of the whole? Go ahead and close that at 6:35. Two things on the agenda tonight. We have a presentation on the preliminary downtown tax increment financing, otherwise known as a TIF, eligibility report. Welcome.
Mayor, Village Board, just a quick introduction here. Our guests from, our consultants from Kane McKenna are here. As you know, the board had approved what I'll call a phase one agreement with Kane McKenna to complete an eligibility study. They have done so. That's attached and included in your packet here. And Phil and Brett from Kane McKenna are going to go over the results of that. I think first, just kind of set the table and remind everyone of what a TIF is and answer any questions that you have. Phil?
Thanks. Did I turn this off?
Green is on.
Now
There
it's
you
green.
go.
There we go. One of the ills, this is not one of the ills of growing old. I've always been colorblind. So that's what.
That's your
thank you
story
for-
and you're sticking to it, right?
Yes, that's right. So, thank you for being here tonight with us. And as Jake explained, we want to explain something about tax increment financing as a concept, and then talk about the preliminary eligibility report that we undertook with a lot of help from Jake and his staff. So, we go to the next slide. So tax increment financing is really an economic development tool that's established under Illinois law. It's been around since 1977. The law allows units of local government to designate certain geographic areas that meet certain criteria as tax increment financing districts for a period of up to 23 years. We kind of view it as both a complement to the comprehensive planning tools that you utilize, as well as an economic development and financing tool. So how does a TIF work? Well, the basic concept is that you take a look at the assessed valuation of properties that are considered to be underutilized for their maximized purpose. Take a look at those equalized assessed valuations right now, and you say, is there a possibility that with private development they could grow? And if the answer is yes, then you've got the initial equalized assessed valuation, the proceeds of which from taxes still go to all the taxing districts. And then you've got up here the growth that has occurred by virtue of your impetus in private development that's occurred. That difference is the increment. So in the term tax increment financing, it refers to the difference you're making between the initial as-is assessed valuation times the tax rate versus the to-be equalized assessed valuation times the tax rate. So it's new property growth and it's private development that drives what TIF is. The additional property taxes are set aside in a specific fund, and they're utilized only by board action for specified purposes, which include public infrastructure, land acquisition, interest costs to encourage development, school tuition reimbursement, a whole list of things. But an emphasis there is it's a separate fund, but it's still controlled by the village board. So what projects typically will you see in a TIF district? You see redevelopment substandard, obsolete, or vacant buildings. Public infrastructure is a big thing that TIF is used for. Cleaning up properties that are affected by environmental contamination that need it. Improving the vitality of downtown businesses. Rehabilitating historic properties and providing infrastructure. I'd like to emphasize, in particularly a downtown area such as you have and such as we've studied. It's also very helpful in things like facade grants and rehabilitation of existing businesses. So it's a tool that's used, in fact, where Brett came from Berwyn, they were very creative in the ways to use it for existing businesses, so they were beneficiaries and could grow their businesses as well. The next one. So this is really the way we see TIF being built within the community. You've got economic development goals, which are most typically expressed in your comprehensive plan and are expressed specifically in the Cary 2015 comprehensive plan. You build on top of those comprehensive plans, and you set redevelopment goals and activities and objectives within the TIF plan itself. Those include what your budget's gonna be, what types of development you wanna encourage, if there's priority areas within the area as a whole, the types of activities that you want to encourage private investors to come in with. Go next one. This is kind of what I described a little bit earlier, but I like it described in a bucket approach. The base revenues, that basically what the local governments are receiving right now, the equalized assessed valuation they have, times their tax rates, and only they control their tax rates, that's the base revenue. They continue to receive that. The second bucket is the bucket where the incremental revenues, those that have come about as a result of your actions and private development actions, they go into the TIF. So anybody who is in a TIF district is not paying any more or less taxes by being in a TIF district. The one who goes ahead and improves property, builds a building, is paying more, but obviously they're getting benefit out of the fact that they've built a new building. Very much like what I equated to, if you've got a home and you improve your home, the good news is your home is worth a lot more. The bad news is, if you will, you're gonna get taxed somewhat higher. TIF is really the same principle. It doesn't change that at all. It just divides the revenues into two different buckets. Go to the next one. This is what you'd normally expect a TIF district to do. Just showing the diagonal line going up. TIF's gonna take a little while to get started, so it incrementally grows as you go over time. I guess, is that blue line? I guess it's the blue line, the diagonal line is showing the potential increment, and the base is shown in whatever color that is at the very bottom there. That's normally what you expect with a TIF. To be quite frank, you don't always see that, because you won't always see the same level of investment by the private sector in given years. So you see some bumps and whatnot. At the end of that period of time, that delta, that difference between the blue line and the red line is called recovered value, and that benefit is then distributed to all taxing districts on a proportional basis. So that's kind of the way it works. Now to talk a little bit about the preliminary study that we did. This is Cary's downtown TIF district, generally bounded by Cary-Algonquin Road, village boundary, and the Fox River along the southeast and along Northwest Highway. I want to point out, this is the area we studied. This is not necessarily the area that you may wind up deciding on a particular TIF district. We always encourage, take as large an area as you think you might want to look at, and then you can make adaptations of that as you go along the way. We go to the next one. So our finding was that this TIF area would qualify under the laws what's termed a conservation area. And a conservation area means that at least 50% of the buildings within the area are 35 years of age or older. Brett can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the figure is 89% of the buildings in this area are more than 35 years of age or older. And what was the other figure, about 75 years of age or older?
Yeah, 46% of the structures are 75 years of age or older.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, they're old buildings. I love old buildings, but the state statute specifically set aside a category that if you have age as a factor, then of the 13 potential sub-qualification factors, you only need to meet 3 of those factors. Emphasis, this is not factors that you're finding on every parcel, every building whatsoever. By no means are you. The findings that are required under the Act have to be reasonably distributed to a meaningful extent. So it's like you can't take, okay, the far western end has one building that has certain categories, and the Far East has certain categories. They gotta be reasonably distributed, but it's not every building. So the factors that are highlighted there, 1 through 6, are the factors that we found in the preliminary eligibility study. 6 factors is 3 more than the necessary factors, so it's a comfort level in terms of making a finding that you've got 3 factors as a conservation area. I'm certainly prepared to go through any of these factors in more detail. One of the ones that I think is good to point out is lack of community planning. One of the things we've noted in this study is that Kerry's done a lot of good community planning. Lack of community planning doesn't mean anything with respect to either the village or necessarily any of the structures in there. What happens here is these structures are very old. Many of them were built before you had any community plan whatsoever. Even those that were built since you had your first community plan, things have changed. I think 2015, if I got it right, is the most recent community plan. That called for a number of very good objectives, taking more advantage of the Fox River, getting larger parcels in size to allow for development. So the reason we cite that as a factor is that when you go to the 2015 plan and you look at the area, you say, gee, things need to be done to conform with the 2015 plan. Lag and decline in equalized assessed valuation is just an arithmetic measurement. You look at the area, if it's declined in 3 of the last 5 years as compared to the village as a whole, then that factor's there. Deleterious land use and layout, that's also very much a factor of A's. Do you have businesses next to each other that really aren't compatible in terms of your overall land use? Inadequate utilities was something we definitely found here. You've got very, very aged facilities in this area that probably need replacement and certainly upgrading to the extent that you're looking at new development. There's some deterioration that's somewhat in the building, somewhat in the site improvements. Again, not every place, but reasonably distributed. And obsolescence is another one that also goes with age as well. You got some structures that are not necessarily being used for what their intended use was when they were first built, and that's noted in a reasonable distribution.
Can I ask a question about this slide?
Sorry.
So when we're talking about the TIF district, are you guys talking about the one that you guys were looking at expanding? Or are you guys looking at, okay, this right here?
That's it.
Okay, so then my next question would be, what is the definition of buildings? Is it homes as well, or is it buildings like businesses?
What we looked at included businesses and homes, included both multifamily structures and single-family structures.
So even,
Basically, everything that's contained in that map.
okay, thank you. So even with everything that is considered a single-family home or homes that people live in, can you go back to the other slide, sorry? It said 50% of the buildings were at least 35 years old,
Correct.
still?
Correct.
Wow,
Right,
Okay.
we counted all the buildings in there. Do
There
you
were
remember it was like 186?
194 structures total in the study area, and 172 are more than 35 years of age.
thank you.
Okay. So then we wanted to just go through, what are the steps in the process? The TIF process, excuse me, normally takes 6 to 8 months. First, you identify the geographic area, you've done that. You determine on the preliminary basis whether or not you can meet qualification factors to move forward. You've now accomplished that. So step 3 is where we really pick up. If the proposed TIF district is found to qualify, then you would prepare a formal eligibility report and a formal redevelopment plan. And by formal, it's really tying down the elements of the eligibility report, putting a little more information in there, for example, of what exactly are the utilities that need to be replaced. Is it an 8-inch main that needs to be replaced with a 12-inch main? It's elaboration on those kinds of things. We haven't done a TIF redevelopment plan first. Again, that's the plan that really builds off the comp plan and talks about what the objectives are within this area and maybe where priority areas are, sets a budget, sets a maximum number of years. It's sort of the, if you will, the document that you think you will always refer back to as the key planning document with respect to the particular TIF district. That's all put on file with respect to, with the village's clerk for public inspection. Fourth step is the proposed TIF district. If it includes more than 75 residential units, which we find this district would, then you have to prepare a housing impact study, which is included within the TIF redevelopment plan. We go on to the next one. Likewise, when you have more than 75 units contained within the area, you do what's termed a public meeting. That's a specific additional hearing, if you will, for which all of the residents within the area are given this particular invitation, the explanation of what TIF is all about, answering of questions. They're normally a very informal give and take with a presentation that is, geared to something that makes sense to them. Step six is you establish what's termed an interested parties registry. We're not sure, you may have had one with respect to your original TIF. If you do, it's just adding on to that. The Interested Parties Registry offers the opportunity for any resident, actually anybody, it doesn't have to be a resident of the Village of Cary, to sign up to receive the redevelopment plan, the qualification report, further reports that are done, minutes of meetings that are taken, invitations, agendas, et cetera. Basically, whatever they want to participate in from a public standpoint, they're put on a list and will receive notice from that. The next step is you're sending notices to the taxing districts that have the major jurisdiction within the TIF for a meeting called the Joint Review Board. The Joint Review Board consists of the county, the community college district, the elementary district, the high school district, library district, park district, village itself, fire protection district, if I'm not sure, fire protection district, and a public member. They meet and they review the eligibility report and the redevelopment plan. And their job is really to say, do those conform with what the statutory requirements are? They can meet anytime they want. Actually, they can meet every day over a 30-day period of time. The village calls the initial meeting, and after that, it's up to the Joint Review Board to decide how many meetings, how many documents, how many questions they want to ask. At the end of that period of time, they issue a report. That report is either in favor of going ahead with the TIF, or it's against, or if they issue no report, it's taken to be in favor. They can have suggestions for changes in the plan. All of those come to the village board. It's ultimately all the village board's determination. If the Joint Review Board determines that they do think all the criteria have been met, then it's just if the village board decides to go forward with it, then it's just a simple majority of the village board. If the Joint Review Board decides that they don't support the TIF district, then it would take a 3/5 majority or a super majority of the village board to adopt it. That process, as I say, goes on for 30 days. It actually can be extended for another 30 days if there's a need and the Joint Review Board feels it needs more information. Step 8 would be you're sending notices out to residents within 750 feet radius of the proposed area. You're notifying all the parties in the Interested Parties Registry, and all of that is for a public hearing. The public hearing takes place in these chambers. It's conducted by the board, not unlike the public hearing that you had earlier tonight. A presentation is made, questions and answers. Obviously, with public hearings, they can be 15 minutes, they can be 5 hours. I was at one that lasted till 2 in the morning one time. That was my all-time high. There's publication of the public hearing notice. I mean, there's a lot of steps in the law that require transparency and openness in terms of notifying everybody what's happening. So all the notices are sent to the taxpayers of record as well. Anyone who owns property within the TIF district gets a notice of the public hearing, is entitled to copies of the plan, redevelopment plan, eligibility report. Then you hold the public hearing. If you go one more, I think just, okay. Then the governing body, the village board, would decide after that deliberation if they want to adopt 3 TIF ordinances. If they adopt the ordinances, the TIF is established. It's filed with the municipal clerk, files it with the county clerk. It's up to the county to set the exact base equalized assessed valuation and to formally put the TIF in motion. If that all happens, then the village board would, as we talked about earlier, commence development, redevelopment projects, make all of the determinations with respect to the budget and the disposition of any earnings, make all the decisions in terms of what projects might be developed that you want to give TIF money to, because it's not gonna be every project. So the adoption process, as we've looked at it, but now just on a preliminary basis and subject to further review by village staff and village attorney, would probably take you to about to August. So it's not a short process. It's a process with a lot of checks and balances and a lot of public input.
Well, before you go to the next slide.
Yes.
One of your very first ones, I think that one of the bullet points said 4 to 6 months. So is that just for that step, 4 to 6 months?
No, that's a great question. Normally, the process is 4 to 6 months, and I would say 80% of the time, it's 6 months.
Is
Because
that end to end, though? 6 months end to end, or just that?
End to end, end to end. In this case, we're suggesting it's gonna take longer because you've got more than 75 residents in the area. So you've got 2 extra steps. You've got a housing impact study, and you've got public meetings. Those steps are gonna take it a little bit longer, basically up to 8 months.
Okay, thank you.
And there's been, as the board knows, I mean, when the first contract was approved with Kane McKenna, that was earlier this year. There's been a lot of work going on in the background here just to get us, to this, I think we're on to step 3. So certainly a very involved, complex process, so we want to make sure that we get all the steps right.
So we're, again, going back to the timeline, are we thinking 8, 9 months from November 15th when we signed?
We're
We approved
thinking
it.
August of next year.
Okay, which is really a year and a half from when we first started talking about this, back in February, according to the dates that you
Yeah.
have in here. Okay,
And
just
it-
trying to understand the timeline.
And trustee, just, my own preference is to err on the side of a little more time. We could tighten up some of the steps in the timetables. Sometimes, obviously, you're influenced by when village board meetings are. I had one I was preparing a schedule for today, and the village board only meets once a month. So that's about a 10-month schedule because of that. So some of this can be tightened up altogether, but, we wanna make sure that there's adequate time for consideration by the board, and there's adequate time to get documentation out for the public.
Okay, thank you.
So the last slide we put up is just for what we generally go through with villages in terms of public policy considerations, in terms of implementations. I'll just sort of quickly walk through these. These are not the only ones, but just common ones that come up. Is there about 4? Is there a feeling that, gee, we need to do something in order to incentivize private development to come in? If you've got private developers left and right who are ready to do projects in the TIF downtown area, then I don't think you should do a TIF district. What effect will a TIF on other taxing districts? Well, we talked about the fact that the tax revenue that they're receiving based upon the current equalized assessed valuation still goes to each and every tax district. And they have ability, somewhat limited by state law, but they have ability to raise their tax rates as well. They also continue to have the ability to tax other property. But the other thing that's of particular concern to school districts is, wait a minute, what if you do this and it results in new students? Well, one of the things that you can use TIF money for, and actually are mandated under state law to use it for, is to have a set aside for tuition reimbursement. So just as a rough example, if as a result of the village board decisions, there's a new residential structure built that produces 10 additional students, and let's say that the state says that the tuition estimate is $10,000, to be simplistic. Well, then $100,000 for that year has to be set aside, and it's a first lien basis. That's the first money to go out. Similar for the library district. Library district each year is entitled to a certain amount of money based upon library patrons that come in as a result of the redevelopment. I'm certainly not gonna say that you're gonna have every taxing district that's not gonna have other ideas, because there are taxing districts who say, hey, wait a minute, we'd like to do this or that with respect to it. And I don't think this is the case, but If there are facilities of a public body located within a TIF district, and they want to do some rehabilitation of those facilities, TIF money could be used for that. TIF normally runs 23 years, but it's your option, doesn't have to. If there are funds in any given year that aren't being used for TIF purposes, they have to be declared surplus. If they're declared surplus, and you also have the option of just saying you're going to declare a surplus. If they do, they go proportionally to all the taxing districts. So there are a number of ways in which taxing districts can gain some financial benefit, as well as just the, we showed that graph with the diagonal going up. At the end of a TIF, there's a great amount of recovered value. And going back to the first point there, the argument is, but for the TIF, you wouldn't have that whole recovered value.
I have a quick question on that. Maybe I might be misunderstanding you. But what you're saying is every year you have to go through, and if you don't use the money, you have to, so every year you have to rebate if you have extra money that you've gotten? So every year you're rebating all the different taxing bodies?
No, you're not mandated to do that.
Okay.
But you sort of look at the projects you have, and you say, okay, have we funded them all?
Okay.
Or maybe have we funded 80%? Have we decided, because you're deciding this on an annual basis with your
Right.
regular budget? Or have we decided that 3 of the projects that we initially wanted to fund, we don't want to fund, we got a grant for, whatever the case may be? You're making the decision as to what, on an annual basis, what funds you need to complete projects and what money you don't need, and in that case, you declared surplus.
Right, but if we declared a surplus, can we, if we said, hey, we're gonna carry that over to the next year, right?
You could carry it over
Yeah.
to
Okay,
next year.
Yeah.
I was just kind of curious.
we-
Otherwise, I think you'd be rebating every year
No,
stuff.
go ahead.
We have annual meetings, Joint Review Board was brought up here, so there's annual meetings that Brian has with the various taxing
Okay.
bodies, gives them updates on what projects have been completed out of the TIF, which ones are planned, so that they have an idea of how those funds are earmarked.
Makes sense, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Phil.
The third point up there was just what types of development should be funded. Some of that comes through the process of establishing it. It also comes in terms of the deliberations that you go through, that you make decisions. Do you want to put an emphasis on facade improvements? Do you want to put an emphasis on infrastructure that benefits everybody? It becomes a board consideration on a continual basis. What resources are available, other resources available to the municipality? This is a frequently asked question, and I think one that merits discussion, and particularly at the public hearing. I go way back in economic development, so I can remember things like urban development action grants, housing development action grants, federal programs that go back to the 70s and 80s, where there was a lot of money available to do rehab projects, to do upgrading of downtowns. There's no federal programs available anymore. Then we go into the 80s and 90s, and there were a lot of state programs. There was a lot of state grants and low-cost loans to do programs. There really aren't any state programs of any material value for a downtown area. So we've come to a point where it's really up to municipalities to see what programs they can come up with. There's a couple other programs we always take a look at in the process. You could do a special service area, which takes care of the infrastructure in the area. Problem with that is it's an additional tax on all the property owners in the area. You can sometimes look at a business district. Business district is taking the same area, basic qualification criteria, but in order to fund the improvements, you're taking a 1% sales tax in addition. So there's an additional tax with respect to that. Plus, business district, we generally find don't work well in downtown areas because you're hitting small merchants. They tend to work well in, Yorktown Mall has a business district. I don't know if Vernon Hills did it, but they were considering it in large areas like that. So what are the resources? Unfortunately, nowadays, there are not a lot of other resources for redevelopment available to the municipality. And then the final bullet point that we had, subject to yours to add to it, how do you estimate the amount of incremental taxes compared to the cost to develop? Any particular proposed project that comes in, one of the analysis that you require of that development entity is, what are you going to produce in terms of incremental taxes? And typically, you'll have your own check on that in terms of the financial integrity of that. And you compare that to, well, okay, how much are you bringing in and how much are you expecting us to bring in? Are you asking us to use TIF money to fund 75% of your project? or are you asking us to provide 25% of the project? So there are tools, again, because you make the decision on individual developments as they go along, there are tools you can use to measure whether or not it's a good deal and whether or not the development is going to produce incremental taxes sufficient to pay for the incentive you might give. And I think in the case of what we've talked about with Jake and the staff, you want money to come in to pay for infrastructure improvements as well. So you want to see it's a win-win situation. So that there was just a sort of a summary of some bullet points we had on it. And if you choose to go through the process, I'm sure you will develop many more policy considerations.
I have a quick question for Brett. I'm just kind of curious, something that caught my ear was when you guys were chatting here about how, was it in Burr Ridge, they did something creative with it?
Berwyn.
Berwyn,
actually,
okay, I know
yeah.
it's somewhere like that, Burr Ridge, Berwyn.
We
What-
developed it. Would you like
Yeah,
me to
I
talk
know.
a little bit about that?
I would love to hear a little bit about that, just out of curiosity, what did you do that was so creatively different?
Functionally, we created a streamlined program for use of TIF funds for business rehabilitation.
Okay.
So it was based on a percentage of investment in a physical structure. And so it basically established parameters. I can provide contact information. You can contact the Berwyn Development Corporation, and they'll provide you, all that information. But functionally, it's just streamlining the process of approval by council.
Did you find the users were principally small businesses?
Yeah, traditionally, it's smaller businesses that take advantage of those dollars in that instance.
So the village has had some experience with TIFs. I would say probably not what we would have liked. What's the downside? Explain to the board what the downside of an unsuccessful TIF is.
Well, actually, if I can refer to Dan, Dan and I are share an interest in one, and Brett, that there's a downside of this, Spring Hill Mall in West Dundee, Carpentersville, it's negative increment. I mean, it just, since they set the TIF district up, it's gone down. Now, they're considering TIF or other options with respect to that now. There's not a guarantee with TIF that it's going to be successful in terms of attracting development. The other downside is that I can see is that, for whatever reason, municipalities decide to give too much money to development. And that too much money comes into development, it doesn't produce the incremental taxes generated, becomes a problem, both financially and optically as well. Those, I would say, are the two biggest downsides of it. You could also have TIFs that just, we show that line of incremental taxes going up. If you set up a TIF in 2006, 2007, you saw huge dips because of what happened to the economy at that particular point in time. Now, some of those recovered and once started going back up. Some of them didn't recover and barely got back up to sort of that baseline altogether. Those are economic factors, I think, beyond the control of any municipality. I'd say those are the three biggest risks with respect to it.
So let me just follow up on it if I could. I thought your report was excellent. It put in words things that I think the vast majority of the people in town feel in one form or another. Let's just say, for instance, that you wanted to put in a new road for whatever reason, but put in a new road within the TIF, and maybe you wanted to develop, or not develop, I'm sorry, bury the utility lines, which I think, when I read that, I smiled, mild wide, because that's an eyesore everywhere you go. And let's say those costs were $3 million, for whatever the cost would be, and the TIF never really takes off. How does that 4, 5, 3, whatever millions of dollars of cost, how does it get repaid?
Okay, so, very good question. There's two types of financings that are prominent in TIF. One is the developer self-finances it, so it's really called a pay-as-you-go. Developer only gets the increment to the extent it's actually generated in a year. For municipal improvements, one of two things is gonna happen. You're either gonna wait on the improvements until the increment is there and proven, and you can see there's a stream of revenue to pay it back, or you're gonna upfront it. And when the municipality upfronts it, it means you're gonna issue general obligation bonds. So the downside is, you upfront it and you don't get the growth, then the GO is gonna kick in. They would be what we call GO alternate revenue bonds, so that the primary source of repayment would be from the TIF. But to sell those bonds in the marketplace, you've got to say, if the TIF doesn't work, we're going to put our general obligation on top of it. So there is a downside on that. One of the things with financing infrastructure is that if you don't have the projects lined up, that you can feel reasonably certain that it's going to produce the increment, then you may have to wait to do those infrastructure projects. If you've got, and again, I'm not speaking to the situation here, but if you've got, for example, 2 or 3 major developments that are coming in, they're coming on board the next couple of years, and you feel confident and you can see the increment generated, then you may say, well, yeah, based upon that increment being generated, we feel confident with that that whatever debt we incur for the public utilities would be paid back.
Thank you.
Dan, did you want to add into
Yeah,
it?
I'm just gonna, there's a couple, I can just could stand up here, there's a couple of things, Dan Gardner, it's good to see everybody again.
Can we
Oh.
hold really quick and I can switch the Zoom so then Trustee Walrath doesn't miss anything?
Sure. Take a 2-minute break for a minute.
Sorry about that.
You look like you're itching to say something, so.
On the edge
I'm
of his
always
seat.
itching to say something. It's part of being a consultant and,
I feel like customer service. Please hold while I try.
yeah, your comments are very important
You're
to us.
you're number 2 in the queue.
Yeah.
And it looks like he's on.
Okay,
Continue,
Courtney.
Dan. Thanks, Courtney.
Yeah, so a couple things. Phil had mentioned with the question about where some of the downsides are, some of those cases of where communities overextended themselves, where I don't think you're seeing that as much today, Phil, is when during the heyday of when development and money was just kind of just out there and there was just this kind of, seemed to be just this open spigot. I think there were some lessons learned back then that aren't going to be repeated today. So that overextending to developers that then got all their money up front and then went away, or the development went south, is unlikely. The other part of it is the due diligence, the stewardship that takes place in overseeing, and this isn't meant to say that any of those communities that experienced it didn't do that, but this community is very much in a position that is poised to provide that due diligence, not let those things happen. There's one thing to have overextending the funds. It's another thing to just, hey, the development didn't take off the way we envisioned it. You're still subject to market dynamics in the economy that through nobody's fault, those things can happen. What you will see here is that the due diligence that's being done and the amount of time and effort that is given into making sure that it's done correctly is extremely important, and it's going to be there. I'm going to be there for that. You have a very good consultant staff, everybody that's here to ensure that, because you also want to develop a positive message to the development community and the investment community. You don't get that many shots to do it wrong, because eventually that message gets out there, and it's tough to come back and then sell to the community that we want to do this again. This is a very different process. This is going to be a very detailed process. The properties that are involved, as you heard, are poised for development. And I'll get to in my presentation shortly. The perception of Cary is very, very positive out there, and it's just a matter of getting into a very competitive environment. These are one of those tools, as Phil had said. There aren't that many tools available to give you some competitive leverage, and this is one of those things that can be done. Trustee Dudek, to your question too about the infrastructure improvement, if that infrastructure, such as a road, was being proposed solely for the purpose of some hypothetical development that never occurs, that's one thing. But if the infrastructure project is something that is going to serve the community regardless, the TIF gives you some benefit to recapture that cost. But if that project should be going forward and would go forward regardless, but there's just no funding immediately available, the TIF is a mechanism for recapturing at least some of that cost to something that's going to service the community regardless. So that's another way to look at it. So that's any questions for me, but I'm scheduled as bullet point number 2, I think, up there on the agenda, so
Maybe
I'll
just,
step back.
because you touched on it, so in the report, Phil, item number 5, when you talk about the dog leg turn, 14 and East Main and all, does, and this is kind of a question for both you guys then, the way, Dan, that you just talked about that roadway, does that same thing apply conceptually to maybe some sort of a T intersection at 14 and East Main?
I'll answer in one respect, and you may want to add to this. The thing with state roads, which I know you guys all know is tough with, work with the state on roads. The way we've seen TIF used mostly with state roads, whatever the improvements are, is obviously the state's got to sign off on it. But the state typically has a match, and TIF funds can be used for the match, whatever, 10, I don't know what, 10, 20%, whatever it is they require from the municipality. You can use TIF funds in order to deploy those with the state funds to make it happen. Getting the state to do it, I have no idea.
Another question. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I think
Phil,
you guys
did you
did a
want to
great job.
continue? You done?
Yes.
Phil, you've concluded? I kind of jumped over there. Apologize for that. Is there any other questions for Phil or Brent? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want a consensus? All right, we've heard the report and the presentation. Is there, I'm looking for a general consensus to move to the next level.
Yes.
Next level would be bringing an agreement before the board to start, continue along here with the next phase. So certainly if the board is in support of moving along in this process, we'd like to know.
I'm probably just in the minority of how big the TIF district is, so you're looking for a consensus? I'm not.
Just because of the size of the TIF
The
or
size,
the size of, or just the TIF in general?
The size of it, and then there's some other things too with, I'm just right now not in favor of it, but one is the size and 2 of it is I've talked about it a little bit with you, but like for the school
Taxation.
district and also the fire department and just different scenarios.
Sure.
I'm in favor of looking further. I think that that's the only way we're gonna get some of our areas developed, is to have some mechanism in place. Maplewood being the biggest out there, if that was something we're looking at, or again, just downtown, doing some of the things that we'd like to do, change it around. I think we would have to be very cognizant of the school districts, the fire districts, the different places, and have mechanisms in place to make sure that they will not be harmed by it. But I definitely am in favor of moving forward.
Can we go back to the map?
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about that for a second? From a size perspective, when we put this together, there's been a lot of work that's been going on behind the scenes from a staff level and going over these properties. And we look at a lot of these properties and just see, we know what your vision is. We know what the board's vision is based on the comprehensive plan. You just completed a downtown plan. That's a great plan. And to get to that point, we need some help, and that's what the TIF district can offer. I think that there's a lot of underperforming properties within this map right now. You just heard from Phil and Dan of there's just not a lot of tools out there for us. We're a non-home rule community. We have limitations here on what we can offer developers, and to be able to meet the vision that you have for the village of Cary, we need to have a tool, and we believe that that has to encompass this entire map.
What is the outlined area in the center with the blue dashes?
That is not included. So that area you don't see it in here.
Part of True Value.
No.
This area right here,
What do they call it? The Hilltop subdivision?
yeah, so that,
line though that you're looking at is my mouse. So that, the little blue,
Oh, drawn
that's
in,
me.
sorry.
oh,
Sorry.
yeah, so that
You're not.
red area
This
that's,
is done.
yeah, the red area that's in the middle is
triangle.
not in, yeah, thank you, the red triangle is not gonna be included. So roughly where the blue area is, but I'll blame that on Courtney, the blue area.
I'll take the blame.
Glasses are on. Thank you.
Okay, Trustee Walworth, since we're going from that direction, your thoughts?
I'm definitely in favor of continuing the process. I think it's the biggest arrow we have in our quiver. And I think if we're going to continue the economic development that we've seen a little bit downtown, and to Trustee McAlpine's point, Maplewood being the largest piece in there, this is something we definitely did move forward with.
Okay.
I'm in favor.
Trustee Collier, Trustee Dudek?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Jennifer, you and we'll sit down and we'll talk.
I'm still
Again.
going to hold firm on my thought for now.
No, that's fine. No, I just want to make sure that you get all your questions answered and get clarification.
I think, Mayor, it would be helpful that we hear what those are too, the rest of the board. So
Sure.
don't have to share it now, but
Yeah,
you might have valid points. I think it's good to
we're
share
not thinking
those.
of.
Right, that's why I want to just get those. We had a conversation before. We can just flush those out and bring them forward. But good conversation. Right, so we have a majority of the board moving forward with this. All right, next topic is economic development update. I'm going to bring Dan back.
So building off of this conversation, obviously, this is an important tool that the village has. To your point, this is the beginning part of that. So there is looking at that greater area of where that development can occur and how the funding mechanisms can take place, and properties that are impacted are going to be an important part of that evolving discussion. So there's a very iterative process that goes through a lot of these different steps. And as I am out there talking to, so just to kind of remind you, I've been brought in to help with economic development and to speak with the existing property owners, prospective property owners. In my background of working in the development community and with various potential prospects and tenants and developers that are out there. The good thing that Cary has that a lot of communities don't have is that you have a breadth of every basically conceivable type of use that can locate to a community. Some communities are strictly working with potentially a retail base, or it's all residential, or it's largely industrial. You have everything here. So that's the good, and it's also the challenge, because we have properties that can accommodate a lot of different things. And going out and kind of casting that net to bring people here is it's very encompassing. So when I'm out there talking to people, I'm talking to residential developers, I'm talking to brokers on every type of use. What I have found is that a lot of times when you first discuss Cary, the first notion is kind of like, yeah, it's a McHenry, or there's not a complete education of where Cary is or what it has to offer. But when you bring people here and you show them, there's this real kind of epiphany of like, wow, this is a wonderful community. I've never heard anybody say anything other than being impressed with the village and the reputation that staff has, the reputation that the elected officials have, the appointed officials, and that in even working with the organizations within the county. But it's a very competitive market. So my job over the last several months has been meeting with the existing property owners, meeting with existing businesses. I always say that the most important business you have is the one you already have. So you want to keep the people that are here. They're important, they're part of the fabric of the community. But then using the network of people that I know and the organizations that I know, and getting the word out that this is a community that is very proactive, has a very positive view of the future, the tools that are being put in place, the planning that's been done. That delivers a message of fair certainty to developers, to investors, and prospective tenants, that this is a community that there's no guesswork in terms of, what am I going to have to do? What hoops am I going to have to go through? It's a welcoming from a business development standpoint, and that's tremendously valuable to me as I am delivering the message out there. Obviously, even in the last several months, market dynamics have changed, the financial dynamics have changed. I've watched investors pull out of deals where the end user or the developer has to recalibrate now, because a lot of these deals are put together with 4 levels of financing, or you have mezzanine financing, or you have different types of people that are in the deal, and if one pulls out, it can collapse the whole deal, and the whole deal has to kind of get put together. That's what we're seeing. So it's really kind of pulling back. We're seeing, I have no doubt that this is going to just kind of recalibrate, and investors going to relook at how they're assessing deals. The developers are, or the end users, the businesses. It's just a matter of just kind of getting things back, getting that level of uncertainty back to a level of certainty and expectation. And Cary is poised to be in a really good position to start to take advantage of that again. And in the meantime, that dialogue continues to take place. I'm meeting with a lot of different people at a lot of different levels. Had a dialogue with the schools as well, and just making sure that there's an understanding that the village is being proactive, but also being very cooperative and coordinated effort with all their partners out there. And that's kind of where we're going to be going forward as we kind of hit the ground running in 2023. So at that, is there any question or anything else you want me to hit on?
You hit it. Any questions for Dan?
Great. And I will continue to come before you and give you updates on how things are going.
Yeah, one of the
Well,
things that,
let's see.
Dan, I've had an opportunity to ride the community with Dan a couple times now, and it's very interesting to see his visual concept on what's going on and where we are, and he does give us a lot of credit for our comprehensive plan, our strategic plans, that we're hitting all these nails on the head. I would strongly recommend setting aside some time. Dan will make himself available to meet with you guys individually or talk about various things and what's going on. You know, as you know, sometimes development is confidential. They don't like their names being put out. So if you have an idea or you want to talk about different things, Dan's the guy to talk to. And I would highly recommend spending some time here at Village Hall, or he'll do Zoom calls or on a phone call or whatever. But it's worth your while.
Just a quick question. First of all, I appreciate the update. I think that's something that we all want to hear and know what's going on, and inquiring minds want to know. Are you finding anything that's a hurdle that you feel is a stopping block for us on anything?
There's nothing that I'll call a stopping, but I'm also just being completely realistic, is that you do hear location issues, just in terms of proximity to interstate, things like that. I mean, where there's physical competitive disadvantages that you just can't overcome. And it's just the nature of kind of the location of the community. The positive aspect of that is that, and what I try to demonstrate too, is just when you have a very dense market area with a very good demographic, as well as just a very good business environment. And in some cases, that proximity that may appear to be of greater distance from interstate access can actually be proven to be kind of mitigated by, the traffic flow and the arterials that you do have, that on paper and on the surface may first appear to be an impediment to development, is getting people to realize that you actually have better access than may appear. And there are also users that don't absolutely have to have those locational requirements. And a lot of times when you're looking at it especially from national end users, they're not necessarily looking at, if you can use Crystal Lake as an example. They're not saying we want to locate in Crystal Lake. They're targeting a region, and you're part of that region. And that's an important part of this equation and this discussion is, yeah, Crystal Lake is known because it's a known commodity, it's bigger, and I'm not picking on Crystal, I'm just identifying as that may be the known entity that's outside of the community. But if you look at it from a regional perspective, it's getting people to say, hey, look at Cary as well. And that's part of that discussion.
Thank you.
Any other?
I just thought, when I saw in here economic development update, I just thought that we'd have more details on things. I know you're saying that you don't want to, give names out of anything, but I guess I was looking for Who are you talking with? What specifically is happening? Like, how are we moving forward instead of like a generalization? Because I feel like when we met with you as trustees, I kind of got that more of a generalization on what you're doing, which is fantastic. But with the update today, I thought it was going to be more detailed.
Yeah, this is the first one, and so kind of wanted to get that flavor of what the board was looking for. If you want some more detail, we're more than happy to provide that. The mayor's correct, and that's some information we're just not going to be able to share in public. It's going to be consumed behind the scenes. But whatever the board is looking
Or
for,
if we could get an update, like how we have like a public works update, with our
Absolutely.
weekly updates or something like that, that would be
absolutely.
really awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to do that.
Yep.
Jake and I talk every Wednesday. We have a standing call where we kind of go through everything. Yeah, to that point, this was kind of just meant to be kind of the first of discussions with you to kind of just refamiliarize everybody with kind of what's going on, kind of the lay of the land. But yeah, I'll be happy to. And at any point in time, please call me if you want to get a
Yeah, I'm just
specificity on
removed
things.
from what's going on the inside, so then it's just good for me to hear
Sure.
it in
There-
any form.
There's always opportunity to meet with Dan behind the scenes, as the mayor said. If board members wanted to come in once a week, twice a week.
Or
and
if you
meet
could
with-
just give us
meet
the
with Dan.
information, that would be even better.
Whatever works for
Thank
the,
you.
whatever works for the group.
We'll work on that. I think that's a
Thank
good
you,
idea.
thank you.
I just wonder if it might be helpful, not today, but perhaps at a future meeting, for you to give us, because you're in it day to day, right? You're in the weeds, so to speak. The world's changed a lot, with work from home and all that sort of thing. We might all think that we need gigantic retail centers, but you look around and retail centers are being redeveloped for all different kind of things. Sure, we'd love the sales tax, but we also don't want a white elephant that turns, blank, and even Phil was talking about that. So I think it would be helpful for the board to hear from you that, we need, 2,000 units, housing units that are in the price range of 250 to 350, or we need condos. And this has nothing to do with Maplewood at all. Separately, it'd be nice to get that feedback from what you're hearing out, from your colleagues or in the community, of what are the things that Cary needs to kind of continue to grow and to prosper. That would be helpful because, we kind of have blinders on and we don't know.
Sure, and I could go into that here, but I think if you want to do it as kind of a follow-up,
Yeah, that's
I'll
fine.
defer to you how far, and when we have that more detailed discussion. But absolutely, what you are hitting on is absolutely right. And Phil had referenced, I'm also working with them on another project, another community where it's a wholesale redevelopment of a dying mall. Because those are, nobody's building regional malls in 2022, and there's no prospect of that happening in the future. So, in some cases, the idea that you have a kind of a blank slate in a lot of areas is a positive, because you're not saddled with, you didn't build that mall 20 years ago, and now trying to figure out how to fill it. You have some redevelopment sites that are clean sites, or green sites. The experiential format of retail is really what's kind of taken over, which is kind of just reinforces going back to the downtown TIF, because the downtown environment is going to be important, the mixed-use environment, the residential introducing into that environment. Certainly, there's a need for residential, and there's a lot of different types of residential that come into that equation. But that is going to become, that's part of kind of the economic development equation of the building that density and getting those households and those incomes into, this environment here.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan, appreciate it.
Great,
Look forward to the
thank you.
next one. That'll be it for our agenda today. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned, 7:33.